Hey there, Mobile Lab. In this video, I'm going to walk through the basics of auto layouts and how to use them in storyboards to create your user interfaces. So we're going to be creating something that looks similar to this. So we've got a cover image, a label, and 3 buttons that we're going to be constructing in our storyboards. After building the UI, we're going to wire up the buttons, so when you click on each one of these buttons, the label will change along with the image. So I've already set up an Xcode project as a single view application. So if you look in the navigator, we have one single view controller. And then I've already also imported all of the assets into the project. So looking at the scene graph over here, you could see that we have one view controller and one view that comes by default with every view controller. And like every view, we could change the background color property. So let's try that out. Let's change it to something else to match the comp. Okay. So the first thing we're going to do is just to drag in another view just to demonstrate how auto layouts work. Already, Interface Builder gives you guides to help you align things up. So let's say we wanted to center that on the screen. And let's just give that a different color so we can see it better. Now, the reason why we have to use auto layouts is because of the varying types of devices that iOS provides. So at the more extreme case, if I just put a UI view here, and I looked at it what it looked like on an iPad, it does not stay centered into the screen. You're most likely going to stick with one type of device family for now, but even already you could see at different iOS devices things don't look correct. So to solve that, we're going to be using auto layouts. Using auto layouts, you're going to be setting constraints on both the size and position of the views and its relationship to the other views inside your application. So let's start by just making this guy square. Okay. Let's reposition him in the center. So we've set this view to 240 by 240. Now we can actually lock in that width and height if we like it using this control over here. Width, height, 240, 240. We're adding 2 constraints. So that's the size constraint. Now for the positioning constraint, there's an icon over here. That's center it horizontal and also center it vertical. Okay. So everything is blue, so that looks good. And so what that did is set both the height and the size of this view, and also its relationship to its parent view, which is this outer view here. So if you look here and check on different iOS devices, now you can see that that view is actually centered. Now we could also adjust the constraints after they've been set. So if we select the view that we've created and we come over here, there's a lot of options over here, but the ruler guy over here will show you the different constraints that we've applied to this view. So if you hover over it, you'll see the different constraints applied. Now we can actually come in here and change the width. Let's say we want this to be 300 instead of 240. And there the width has changed. Or if we want the height to be skinnier, we could do it that way as well. Now you might want to remove the constraints you've already applied on your view. You might have made a mistake, or you just want to start fresh. So you can actually come in here and delete these constraints. And now this view no longer has positioning or size constraints. Now the other thing we could try here too is, let's say we wanted the view just to hug the outer parent view. You can actually come in here and set all of these values to 0. So you've got 4 constraints set to 0, add 4 constraints, and it will auto size that for you. Now you notice the top here that it doesn't actually go flush to the top, and the reason is this area is reserved for your battery indicator and clock. The status bar is the top of your UI view, so they put that there so you don't run into it. Now let's say we want to add a little padding around the view. We can actually come into your constraints and update it here directly. And now we've got a padding of 20. One more thing I want to show you is how views can be composed of other views. So let's take this guy, and let's actually, oops, yeah, let's remove all of its original constraints. Let's set it back to centered. Let's give it a size of 300. I'll put it back centered here. Now I can come in here and drag in another view, and I can actually put it on either the parent view, or I could put it within the first view I created, and you see how it's created a parent-child relationship. Now let's say I come in here and I make this 100. Let's change the color to something else. Okay. And we could actually put in the top corner here. So it is set to 100, 100. And let's say I wanted to set the constraints. So setting the constraints for this view will actually apply it to what its parent view will be. So it'll lock it to its parent view. So if I do that, actually let's first set the constraints on this parent view. Let's make it a little bigger so we can actually see what's going on here. All right, so just like before, we're going to set the width, height of that parent view, 300, and then we're just going to center vertical and horizontal. So this parent view has its constraints, but we have not set the constraints of this child view. So we could come back in here, and first let's set the height and the width, and then let's actually have it live on the upper left corner. So knowing that you'll be 0 top and then 0 to the left here. So you set those 4 constraints. Okay. So now that's set. Now what happens if I come and I set the width of the parent to something smaller, let's say, right? That view still stays in the upper left and its constraints are still valid. Okay, let's also try something else here. Let's actually copy and paste this first view, and let's put it on the top right corner. Do that. Copy and paste here again. And so we just replicated 3 more views. Now if I tap on this view created, it already set the height and width constraint, but it doesn't know the positioning constraint. It copied its height and width constraint from the first view. So if I can actually come back in here, sorry, this one, and this way I want top right, I want those set to 0. Okay. Same here, this time, bottom right, 0, 0, 2 constraints, and then bottom left, 4 constraints. So the way this is set up is you've got a parent view and then you've got the child views all attached to the corners. And again, if I come into the parent view and I set the width to something else, maybe not too much, it still behaves as expected. So the thing to be aware of is that constraints will always apply to another view. So this view's constraints are in relationship to its parent view, and same with these other views are in relationship to its parent view. It might necessarily always be relationship to the parent view. You could have constraints that are in relationship to other views on the same level, and we'll show you how to do that in a second. Also, sometimes when you're working, your views may move out of place. And that's where these yellow lines show up. So it's letting you know that there are constraints, but they're not properly positioned because you've manually moved it away. You can actually move it back, or there's a button over here that actually will set it for you. This sometimes works, sometimes doesn't work, so just be aware of that. So hopefully by now you understand the basics of constraints and how views can be composed of other views. So let's move on to replicating the original comp we had. So let's delete everything here. Let's look at, okay, so let's start by adding a UI image to the top of the screen for the cover. Let's look for image view here. Okay, drag that in. Let's put that somewhere around there. Okay, let's actually size it a little. Okay, so looking at the image, we want it kind of centered. There's a little padding on the outside of the image. So let's come into here. Let's first set just an image so we can see what's going on here. Let's set it to Beagle cover. Now you'll see that the image initially is kind of stretched, so to fix that we could set it to aspect fill, and it's actually bleeding over the edge here, so then we'll go clip to bounds. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's start setting the constraints for this image view. Let's come down here. I have some random numbers just because of the positioning. I wasn't accurate in doing it here, but we could actually just adjust it here. So let's say we want the padding of the top to be 20. Let's do 20 top, left and right. Now, with the height, let's give it the image height. Let's actually set this to something like 200. So based on those parameters, we've got padding 20, top, padding left 20, padding right 20, and height 20. Storyboard knows how to properly format this image. We can set that. Okay, and we actually come in here and check the other device sizes. Right? It always locks it to whatever the height was. Let's take a look. We set that height to 200 and the padding is 20. So even on an iPad, not ideal, but it still works. Next, let's bring in a label for the dog type. So let's come out of here, put a label. Let's put that somewhere here. Let's actually size it a little. So we can do a pull for the whole size. And you can come in here and actually do some label styling. Well, let's just make it, let's lighten it up a little bit. Maybe bring up the font. And we'll just give it a default Beagle. All right. And now let's play the constraints for this label. So already it knows that it's where it's positioned. It's 20 here. There's 8 pixel margin to the top, so let's just set that, and then same here, 20, and let's also lock this height as 45. Add the 4 constraints. So similar to the image here, you are basing the label based off of the padding and the height. Now if we come into the top image and we adjust the top spacing, let's say we bring it to 40, we can see it pushes the other label down, as you would expect. Let's bring it back. So now let's bring in the buttons that we see here. Okay. And let's start by just making that a little bit bigger here. Now, when you're positioning things on Storyboards, there's these guides that help you, but you could also, when selecting a view, hold the Option key, and it'll provide some guide information. So you can see if I click here at the Beagle label, Option key, and then move over here, it'll say that it's 8 pixels separation here. It's pretty handy when you're trying to position things and getting things pixel perfect. So for the first button here, let's set the constraint. Say 80/80. Let's say 8 from the top. Now let's copy and paste, and let's do another button. And let's nudge it over. You could also use the arrow keys to nudge UI elements. Let's give it 12 pixels. Again here. Now, like before, when we copy and pasted, it brought over the height and width, but it doesn't have the concept of positioning constraint. So we'll apply position constraint here. So that's 8 from the top, and now the 12 pixels is in relationship to the button to the left. Okay. And now one more time. Nudge it over. Apply 8, 12. So we've got 3 buttons, and then going into each of these buttons, let's set them to the button image that we created over here that we imported. Okay, now let's use the button image that we've created for the button. So first button selected, let's remove the label and set the default image to its Beagle button. Again, remove the label, set the default image to Boston Terrier button. And move the last one. We're going to use the Golden Retriever button. Okay, now with the UI set up, let's wire up our application logic. So let's split screen the view here. Let's set this up. Now, if you don't see this, if you don't have Storyboard and your view controller over here, what you want to do is come over here and hit Option and then select the file. So you make sure you target whatever file is over here. And then clicking Storyboard here will target what's over here. Okay. So let's start by wiring up the outlets. So again, Control click and bringing that over here. Let's call this cover image view. Let's call this dog label. Again, remember, Control click. Let's call this button 1. Just not very descriptive, but that's okay. Call this button 2. Button 3. Okay. Now that we have our outlets hooked up, we don't need this routine. We have a way via code to access and update the view. Now, we also need the action. So when you click on a button, we want something to be fired in here so we could change the label and the cover image. So coming back here, again, Control click on the first button, but this time instead of outlet, we want an action. Change the type to UI button. We'll call this handle button 1. Again, Control click over here. Action, UI button, handle, button 2. Action, UI button, handle, button 3. So when the application runs and we hit these buttons, this function block will get called. So let's go ahead and fill out the code for the button logic. So when I click on the Beagle button, what I want the dog label to read, though it's already set by default by Beagle, but we want to reset that anyways. Let's say dog label. We want to change the text. And we want to set that to Beagle. And let's just copy and paste here real quick. So for the other buttons over here, we want to set this one to Boston Terrier, and the last one to Golden Retriever. So clicking on the first button, this will change to Beagle. Second button, Boston Terrier. Third button, Golden Retriever. So let's go ahead and try this. Simulator. Okay, just as we expected. And then the last part of the logic is we want the cover image to change. So let's stop that. So in the logic for the button 1, let's grab the outlet for the cover image view. And now we want to update that image with a UI image named Beagle cover. And we can do that with the other ones as well. Let's give it change the name on this one. So reading this code here, we've got an outlet to the cover image. We're changing the image property of the cover image view. And this call here is actually creating a new image based on the imported files you've created. Okay, so let's run that. There you go. Beagle, Boston Terrier, Golden Retriever. So the very last thing I want to show you is this problem that you might run into with image views for buttons. So let's close this out and let's select this first button. And though it's square and the aspect ratio of our image is also square, it works out here. But let's say if I change the constraint to this, for this button to 200. Now the beagle's a little stretched out, it looks a little sad. And if you run this, you'll see there's an issue. Let's actually change the background color of this button just so we could see what's going on. Now to fix this, there's no really way to fix it in Storyboards. There's other ways with overriding the buttons, but the easiest way to do it is to actually come in here. Now we have an outlet to the button. Remember, we created outlets to all these buttons. We grab that outlet, and in the view did load, which is the setup, we want to access the image view property of that button. Set the content mode to scale aspect fit. Okay, now let's run this again. Now the aspect ratio of the image is preserved, and the button is the correct size. So just something to be aware of if you run into that problem. But that's it for this video. Until next time.